Good afternoon, everyone. I see that folks are joining. My name's Charles Parasino, and I am the Communications Director for Congressman Larson. As we are about to begin the meeting, I thank you for joining us today. If you have a question for the Congressman, you can submit it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, along with the town you are from. If you are joining us on Facebook today, you can submit a question in the chat along with your town. We may not have time for every question, but we will try to get to as many as we can. Now I will turn it over to Congressman Larson.
Well, thank you, Charles, and thank everyone for joining us. As Charles indicated, we believe that we're going to have to do these more frequently and often. And when we're down here in DC, obviously it's easy for us to do this via TV. But when we're back up in the district, we hope to be doing in-person town forums as well. And the reason for this, as I think all of you understand and recognize, is that President Trump just continues to flood the zone every single day with yet another headline grabber that's going to attract people's attention. And hopefully, if you've tuned into our various town halls before, you understand that this is all part of a strategy. He's the master of distraction. And as I say at the start of all of these, keep in mind his salient goal. His goal is that he wants to make sure that his tax cut of 2017, which he views as his legacy, is made permanent. Now, he has to do that because that tax bill that passed in 2017 sunsets in 2025, this year. It's no coincidence that that sum of money is approximately $2 trillion. It's also no coincidence that he has a multi-billionaire, the wealthiest man in the world, given the assignment without any accountability, without having to be approved or ratified by the United States Senate, without acting as any kind of federal employee or even a volunteer, but under the special status of a special volunteer in Elon Musk, out to find $2 trillion. Not to reduce the national debt, but to further line the pockets of billionaires. And we are here to fight every step of the way. Just this past weekend, on Friday, we were in front of the Social Security Administrative offices in East Hartford, talking about the layoffs that Elon Musk has proposed and what that means in terms of actually cutting benefits to people who are receiving Social Security and cutting a workforce that is already the lowest in the federal government. That's right, you heard me say that. Now here it is, the largest single insurance program that we have, and the administrative costs for Social Security are under 1%. Insurance companies in the greater Hartford area operate with administrative costs between 16 and 26%. The federal government operates the largest insurance program that is not only a pension, but as all of you know, is also serves as spousal, dependent coverage, and disability coverage as well to more than 70 million people. And it's been underfunded and operates at under 1% administrative cost. That needs to be changed, number one. And number two, we shouldn't be talking about laying people off. We should be talking about hiring more people. Why? 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security. 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible for Social Security that is already understaffed and now is reaching 70 million American people and desperately needs to make sure those people get the assistance they richly deserve and have paid for. So, along with that transpiring, Mr. Musk also came out and called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Mr. Trump joined him later and said that Social Security was a scam, all while telling you that, oh, they're not going to do anything to Social Security. My grandfather Nolan had a great line, an old Irish line. It says, trust everyone, but cut the cards. And in the case of Mr. Trump, we not only need to cut the cards, we need to reshuffle in a new deal, one that focuses on protecting and expanding Social Security, not cutting Social Security. He also came out with another pronouncement in what had to be, I think, one of the most embarrassing things I've ever witnessed for the head of state to set up the head of the Ukraine, Mr. Zelenskyy, for what was supposed to be a conversation between he and the president about getting to peace and resolving the differences. Donald Trump went into full Vladimir Putin mode and sided directly and specifically with Vladimir Putin and Russia, and in front of a live audience, humiliated Mr. Zelenskyy from the Ukraine in front of the American public, etc. That is uncalled for and unprecedented. And our hearts go out to all the Ukrainian people. This is not the way the head of state, the most powerful nation in the world, the United States of America, president, should act towards our allies, let alone a nation that Congress has voted over 5 times to make sure that we were sending them the funds they needed to thwart the invader. And let me underscore that, the Russian invader, Vladimir Putin, who invaded Ukraine. It was not Ukraine that invaded Russia. Let us be clear about that. It's no wonder that today in Moscow, the Moscow press is chanting how they have a new ally in President Trump, and in the United States, virtually taking every talking point that Vladimir Putin has put out and saying that's what a deal should be comprised of. Astounding as that may seem. So these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with on a regular basis, all as we get ready for what typically would be called a State of the Union address, but because he hasn't been in a full year yet, it's called a joint address before the United States Congress. And I am very proud that we will be having Cara Satellino, a mother of 4 from Berlin, who will be our guest. Why? Because her daughter, her 9-year-old daughter, Cecilia, has cystic fibrosis. And as I think all of you know, a condition that affects the lungs, the pancreas, and other organs. But thanks to the National Institute for Health and Research, we've been able to make great strides. But now President Trump is calling for $4 billion cuts to the very agency that is helping Cecilia out. That's why we're honored that Cara is joining us and bringing a real life example of what happens when you're billionaires and all you're doing is looking at dollars and cents. And you're not looking at those dollars and cents because you're concerned about bringing down the national debt. No, you're concerned about perpetuating a $2 trillion tax cut that sunsets this year. And where are you going to find that money? On the backs of hard-working Americans in programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This makes no sense whatsoever. And so we are joined as Democrats in this fight, and we're looking for, in the House of Representatives, all we need is 3 Republicans who will stand up and join with us and say, no, President Trump, this is wrong. Let's work together to do whatever we have to do to bring down the national debt. But let us not do it on the backs of people who need money the most under the guise of dealing with the national debt, when the goal here is to give a $2 trillion tax cut to the nation's wealthiest 1% of people. That's what happened in 2017. It sunsets this year in 2025. He's out, and his goal is to make it permanent. So no matter what you see President Trump doing on a foreign stage as it relates to President Zelenskyy, or whether you see him doing something here in the States, at the end of the day, his focus is on one thing, and that's providing $2 trillion in tax cuts for the nation's wealthiest 1%, which of course he and his cohort, Mr. Musk, are very much a part of. And so with that brief introduction, let me throw it open to questions that you might have, and we'll take those questions. But I want everyone to understand that we want to do these so that we can get out as much pertinent information on a regular basis as we can in terms of what's happening, which is almost daily here, in terms of what he's putting out in front of the American public and how Congress is responding. And we may be in the minority, but we are going to be a very vocal and persistent minority, and searching for 3 Republicans in the House to stand with us and stand up for the Ukrainian people, to stand up for preserving Social Security benefits, and to stand up for and with people like Cara Catalina and make sure that her daughter Cecilia can get through her ordeal with cystic fibrosis. Let me throw it open.
Thank you, Congressman. Our first question comes from Jessica, who's joining us from Torrington. And her question is, why do the Republicans continue to try to pull from Medicare, Social Security, and other benefits that Americans who have worked all their lives need? It seems many of the people supporting the current House Republican budget benefit from tax breaks and government contracts themselves.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely right with that, Jessica. First and foremost, let me start by saying that when you look at the federal budget and you look at what makes approximately 70% of that federal budget is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and national defense. And so when they're talking about looking for $2 trillion, that's why they're turning to those programs and then calling them Ponzi schemes. For more than 40 million Americans, Social Security is the only benefit that they have. The wisdom of Franklin Delano Roosevelt is still with us. He recognized after the Depression and through it that we needed to make sure that in our system of free enterprise and capitalism, we needed a safety net that would be there for people. We needed a government trust fund who would make sure that people who through no fault of their own were to lose their job or to become disabled or the sudden death of a family member would find the spouse and children protected and paid for. That's what Social Security does. It's our largest single insurance program, insuring more than 70 million Americans. And you know what? It's never missed a payment. Now, we don't have to go back to 1929 and the great crash and to talk about what happened to people. We can go back as recent as 2008 and 2009 and focus on what happened when people saw their 401k become a 101k and find out that all of a sudden, whoa, those outside investments that I thought would be there, all of a sudden they weren't. And during that same time, Social Security never missed a payment. So that's where they have their eye. That's why we're pushing back. And it's why we're looking for 3 Republicans in the House to stand with us and say, no, this is wrong-headed. We don't need to go there. These billionaires, with all due respect to Mr. Musk, I'm sure he's very worthy of it, but he doesn't need to add on to the $500 billion he already has at the expense of hardworking American people who all they're asking for is their government to secure and come through on the very promise and commitment they gave them when you paid in weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly to Social Security. It's an insurance program between you and the federal government. You kept up your end of the bargain. It's up to the federal government, AKA Congress, to keep up its end of the bargain and not only make sure that Social Security is protected, but also expanded. Imagine the last time Social Security was enhanced. Richard Nixon was president of the United States. That was 1971, more than 50 years ago. And as I pointed out earlier, with more than 10,000 baby boomers a day becoming eligible for Social Security, Congress needs to get to work and enhance the very system. And how do we enhance this? Here's a novel suggestion. How about everybody paying their fair share of Social Security? It will astound some of you to know that people like Mr. Musk either pay nothing or very little, are done paying into Social Security in January. And so what President Biden recommended, and we fully embrace, is to lift the cap on Social Security on people making over $400,000 and have them pay the same rate that every other citizen has to pay, because we all belong to the same country. We all rely on the same military to protect and defend us. And we all rely on Social Security and Medicare to be there for us in our old age and throughout our lives. Thank you for that question.
Our next question comes from Maria, who's here with us on Zoom today. And her question is, what is being done to prevent the decimation of the Social Security Administration and ultimately our checks? I am 72 and rely on this money that we've been paying into all of my working life.
Well, again, Maria, thank you for your question. And the reason the emphasis is on Social Security is because, as the old saying goes, follow the money. It is the nation's most successful insurance program. It does have and insures over 70 million Americans. It is directly paid for by you through payroll deduction. And the trust fund is solvent and solid, except because baby boomers at a rate of 10,000 a day are streaming into the system, and because Congress has not adjusted Social Security in terms of enhancing its benefits since 1971, it is now at a point where if Congress doesn't act by 2032 now, funds will be depleted out of the trust fund. So everybody would see an across-the-board cut, unless, of course, Congress does the right thing, does what it was elected to do, and votes to not only protect, but enhance Social Security, so people not only will know that they're going to get a Social Security check, but that a cost of living adjustment will be there now and in the future, that there'll be an across-the-board increase for everyone, that if you continue to work either out of necessity or because you enjoy doing something, you're not taxed on your Social Security benefits. These are the important things, and to make sure there's no longer this long waiting period for people who are disabled. People have actually died waiting to get their disability check from Social Security. This is why we need to act on this. And this is why Elon Musk and Donald Trump have targeted this. But it cannot sustain the full light of day in hearings and citizens all across. Even if you agree with Trump and Musk, don't you think they ought to have a public forum so that they can explain why they think this is the sacrifice that our citizens ought to be making, as opposed to, God forbid, Mr. Musk and his billionaire class paying their fair share into the program that has been the #1 anti-poverty program for our elderly and for our children.
Our next question comes from Lisa in West Hartford, and she shared a story that her research as a professor is funded by the National Institute of Health, and says, I support 3 students and 1 researcher with this funding. President Trump is arbitrarily changing the agreed to terms for our funding, and this is directly causing me to not accept new students and curtail my research directed at better bone grafts for older women. Please speak out against his restrictions on releasing these funds.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for that question. And please know that I am 100% in alignment with you and support you in your efforts. And so does every Democrat, frankly, in the House of Representatives. In fact, you may have heard me say at the outset, I'm bringing as my guest to President Trump's presentation tomorrow evening, Cara Satellino, who is a mother of 4 from Bristol, and who, as I indicated, has a 9-year-old daughter, Cecilia, who has cystic fibrosis. Her entire family has been advocating for fundraising for cystic fibrosis research for nearly a decade, and to cut off the government funding that assists you and others in the field who are making these efforts is criminal. And I don't know how they can look themselves in the mirror or sleep at night, but I guess when you're amongst the billionaire class, it doesn't bother you that people and children are just facts and figures. They're not your next door neighbor, your friend, a family member, or someone you know personally. But that's not how this nation was built. And that's not how Americans feel in general. That's not how communities respond and states respond, and how the federal government used to respond. But we're with you, and we're committed to keep these important agencies open and running and functioning so that we can eradicate these diseases and assist the very families that need our help the most. Next question, Charles.
Our next question comes from Daria in South Windsor, and she has asked, now that Congress passed the removal of the weapon GPO that affected teachers, firefighters, and police officers, will the funds ever be seen by recipients now that the current administration is gutting the funding needed to get this out to people?
Well, it's a good news, bad news story here, Daria. On one hand, long overdue and much needed. The way that teachers, firefighters, police officers, municipal employees were penalized for paying into the Social Security and earning benefits that they're richly entitled for was long overdue. You know, passed back in, excuse me, 1983, it needed to be repealed. And in fact, in December, the language repealing it was put in place. That's the good news. The bad news is it wasn't paid for. And as we speak, and having sat down with the Social Security Administration and having them work, but again, because they've been depleted of their personnel, it's taking them longer than it normally would have. But they will be coming out with those funds that Congress passed. Now, and people should be receiving their funds. They're indicating right now sometime in April or May. And again, that's good news. The bad news is that the money comes out of the trust fund. So what that means is that the trust fund is depleted and will be, unless the monies are restored, AKA, unless people who are making over $400,000 pay their fair share, then the money will come out of the trust fund and everyone's benefits will be cut across the board. And that would be a disaster that nobody wants to see take place. So all the more reason for Americans to stick together and say, look, let's pass this legislation. Let's make sure that Social Security is funded. But because we know what these benefits provide for the working members of the middle class, and it's what the trust they placed in their government to make sure that they would follow through on this. And to date, the American people have done their job. It's the federal government that hasn't done its job. And it needs to step up and fund these programs and get people the benefits they richly deserve and need. Benefits that, frankly, haven't been enhanced in more than 50 years. Thank you for that question, Daria.
Our next question comes from Anne in Cromwell, and she asks, will you vote no on the Republicans' SAVE Act that could limit voter eligibility?
I will proudly vote against the SAVE Act. While, I support, and I think everybody does, reasonable voter ID standards in Connecticut. The SAVE Act would require most Americans to rely on a passport or birth certificate to prove their citizenship. But 140 million American citizens do not possess a passport. And so it just makes no sense whatsoever from my perspective. And we will continue to work against this. But Anne, thank you for your question. And be assured, we stand with you in voting no on the SAVE Act.
And our next question comes from Diane, who's joining us from Rocky Hill. And she asks, if Trump cuts off aid to Ukraine, is there anything Congress can do to stop him?
Well, as you probably heard me say from the start, we need 3 Republicans to stand with us. 3. They're in the majority in the Senate and in the House. They have a very narrow majority in the House. And so we have voted 5 times bipartisanly in the House to fund the Ukrainian war effort. We need to vote again, and we need 3 Republicans to join with us. I believe that there are more than 3 Republicans who will join with us if they don't cower and back down to Donald Trump. But their leadership has got to be willing to bring this through the floor. And what we can do if they refuse is to do something that's called a discharge petition, where we find the people, and we would need 218 signatures, which would then allow us to overcome the leadership's objection and bring the bill to the floor for a vote. It's called a discharge petition. And that's the alternative that we have. We still have to find 3 Republicans, but I guarantee you that people listening on this line, Democrat, unaffiliated Republicans, know of 3 good people, Republicans in other states, that will vote for this because they understand the importance and significance and what it actually means.
Our next question comes from Leah in West Hartford, and she asks, are there organizations here in Connecticut still not getting funding because of the DOGE and their funding freeze? And if so, what can elected officials do to help?
Well, well, they call it the DOGE, but this is, for those of you not familiar with the nomenclature in Washington, we like to talk in terms of acronyms and abbreviations, but the Department of Government Efficiency couldn't be, I call it DODGE, actually, because they dodge all accountability. Elon Musk, who's the head of it, didn't have to be approved, is not held accountable, doesn't come before any committee, and has been given free rein over a so-called special employee status that can be granted by the President of the United States, in this case, President Trump, for him to go about his business without ever having to disclose any of his financial interest. I have submitted legislation that will require him to do so, or anyone else for that matter that was in the position. But federal funds don't promote partisan agendas. They're supporting people who see a problem in their community and want to try to fix it, et cetera. So that's how the money should be used, plain and simple. That's why we're supporting Attorney General Tong's lawsuit against the Trump administration. And I want to commend Attorney General Tong and the governor and our constitutional officers and members of the General Assembly for standing up and fighting and pushing back. States play a very strong and key role, and so will a number of the state associations. Having been Senate President in the state of Connecticut at one time, understanding how that we can lean on state legislative bodies, can go to all of their associations and get them to talk directly, as many Republican governors have called in and told the president about the impact that cuts on Medicare and Medicaid will have, along with the devastation that would be wrought on Social Security and recipients. And, where do people who get Social Security, where do they spend their money? The money goes back to every single federal congressional district. On average, over $200 million comes back to the federal districts a month. And $200 million a month is spent right back in that district, at the local grocery store, the pharmacy, at the dry cleaners, putting gas in your automobile, paying for rent or mortgage, heating and cooling your home. I don't have to educate anyone on this line about that. You know and understand that's where that money goes. And that's why it's a great economic development tool as well. And so sending back what is rightfully theirs and what they've earned, and only because Congress hasn't done its job and adjusted Social Security to keep pace with where it should be, is what's preventing people from having a better quality of life.
Our next question comes from Sandra, who's joining us from Hartford, and she asks, why are Elon Musk and the Doge accessing sensitive personal information from the Social Security Administration? Is Musk even legally appointed?
Number one, he's not legally appointed. Number two, what they're doing is illegal. Number three, it's being fought. I commend former acting commissioner Michelle King, who resigned instead of turning over anything to the so-called Doge group of people, etc. And we've called in the Ways and Means Committee upon bringing them before us because we want to know what information, if any, they've been able to secure, and what is their purpose? What is their rationale? What do they need this information for? And I think we're going to find that very interesting. But to date, we have not yet heard back from our Republican colleagues as to whether they will even call them before us for a hearing. Can you imagine giving someone that unbridled authority and not even be willing to have them come before Congress and answer questions as to why they are doing it, why they need it, what is the purpose behind that? These are very trying times that we're living in, and I know how frustrating it can get for people at home who are listening to the news and questioning it. Let me tell you, it's equally frustrating being down here and asking your colleagues who know the law why they're not responding and acting to it in accordance with the Constitution.
And our next question comes from David in West Hartford, and he asks, are there any moderate Republicans in Congress who are willing to stand up to Trump and Musk?
Well, David, I think, as you've heard me say throughout this, I believe that that's probably the key question. Who is going to win the Profiles in Courage Award? Who has the gumption? Who has the guts? Who is going to stand up to a tyrant and to face down the president and Elon Musk? in many respects, Musk is more threatening than Trump. And to say that he doesn't have to be accountable or come before any committee, there's nothing more undemocratic and outlandish than that. I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror, but do I believe that there are Republican members in Congress who will do that? Yes. Have they come forward yet? No. But they're about to be put to the test because we're facing a true constitutional crisis. And they are either going to say that we're no longer a democratic republic, but we are a Trump dictatorialship.
Our next question comes from Henry in Wethersfield, and he asks, what steps are House Democrats taking to leverage any legislative powers they have regarding the March 14th government funding deadline?
Well, Henry, thank you for that that question as well. But we're blessed both in Connecticut and in the United States Congress to have Rosa DeLauro leading the negotiations and ready to work in good faith with the Republicans. But unfortunately, they've walked away from the table thus far. But as you know, Rosa is very persistent, as will the entire Democratic caucus stand with and behind her. We don't want any kind of shutdown. I don't feel that that's productive or helps anyone out. But by the same token, you know, when they talk about wanting to do this, Democrats will support partisan legislation that will not support, excuse me, any partisan legislation that doesn't protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And we also want to make sure that everyone understands that there isn't going to be anything that we will allow Trump and Musk to get away with to pay for their tax cuts. And again, let me just say, Hank, that we're blessed that we have Rosa DeLauro, who's the ranking Democrat on appropriations, who's working on our behalf, and she's as tough as nails.
Our next question is from Christopher in Bloomfield, and he says, I make a modest income to support my 4 children with a spouse who works part-time. The cost of my employer's insurance is quite high, but we have been able to qualify for Husky for many years. Will the Republicans' cuts to Medicaid lower the income threshold here in Connecticut for those who qualify for this coverage?
Well, thank you, Chris, for that question. In the legislation House, Republicans passed last week, they made it clear they're going after Medicaid. We know that they need at least $800 billion in Medicaid cuts in order to get their tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%. Now they need actually to write the legislation that will cut the program. That's a little more difficult of a task, but that's where their focus is. There are different ways that they can go after the programs with different impacts on Connecticut providers, such as Husky beneficiaries. In short, we know what they're going to do. We don't know how they're going to do it. My office is in direct contact with Governor Lamont, and how the different proposals may impact the state of Connecticut and its budget, and will continue to fight against any cuts to the program. But that is their focus. That is where they have targeted and where they want to go. We should know more in the coming days, and we'll share information at another one of these forums as well, as soon as it becomes clearer what their focus and goals are. Thank you for the question.
And on a similar note, Carol Ann in South Windsor asks, are you planning on supporting the Republicans' budget and their drastic cuts
Never.
to Medicaid?
And, listen, it's outlandish because there are 435 congressional districts, and they all face the same issues and problems that we do. Some at a greater magnitude than others, but nonetheless, this is something that impacts every congressional district and all Americans. And we will not stand for any of these drastic cuts to Medicaid, to Medicare, or Social Security. And again, I'm grateful for the work of Rosa DeLauro, who is the ranking Democrat on appropriations. Remember, it only takes 3 Republicans to do the right thing here, to understand the ramification of these impacts. A number of Republican governors already called the president on this. Let us hope that Republicans in the House and Senate start to develop a spine as well.
Our next question comes from Reverend Crabtree, who's also in Bloomfield, and she wrote a comment that she's a resident of continuing care retirement community, and she's deeply concerned for Social Security and Medicare, but also for the well-being of the vast number of senior living facilities across Connecticut who rely on their resident Social Security and Medicare as they have computed costs and benefits. In addition, many of these facilities, as well as skilled nursing facilities, depend on the reliable stream of Medicaid payments for their viability. To what degree do you think Congress understands the impact that any of the cuts to any of these programs will have a profound effect on our entire elder care?
Well, to be completely and brutally honest, I don't think enough members completely understand the impact that these programs have and what it means to people's lives and what happens to them. As I said earlier, I don't think that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are losing any sleep at night over these cuts. For them, it's just simply a matter of crunching numbers and looking at statistics. To billionaires that are worry-free and don't have to worry where their next meal is coming from, how they're going to put a roof over their head, how they're going to heat and cool their homes. They can't relate to this. They relate to numbers and dollars and statistics. That's not what a government is about. That's not what a community, that's not what a state, nor what a nation is about. We started by saying we the people because it is about the people. That's what makes a government, and that's what we're sent to Washington, D.C. to do, is to work on behalf of the people. I think it is important that the more of these stories, the more that we can personalize these stories, just like Cara Satellino is going to do with her daughter, Cecilia, the more that we can get this out. I know that Joe Courtney is having a veteran as his guest who was just laid off after Trump made all of this hullabaloo how he was going to help the veterans, and then turns around and cuts the very jobs that they were to have to help them earn a living and put a roof over their head as well. So the more stories that we hear and can share and can put on our website, the better off I believe we're going to be in getting that message across. So thank you again for your very thoughtful question.
We also have a question from Margaret in Manchester, and she asks, when Trump and Musk decide not to follow what the courts decide, who is going to enforce the decisions?
Well, thank you, Martha, and I certainly can appreciate and understand because of Trump, as I think all of you can probably agree, believes that he's above the law. And especially believes now that he's president again, that he's protected by the Constitution. I don't think all lawyers or anyone, including the Supreme Court, would agree with that, but nonetheless, when does Trump or Musk ever let the truth get in the way of something they feel that they want to accomplish that will line the pockets of the very wealthy? And while it's true that the Supreme Court has granted broad immunity to the president, that immunity doesn't apply to Elon Musk or other branches. And should the administration ignore court orders, the court can hold any government official who is failing to follow the law in contempt. And once that's the case, once there's civil contempt, that means fines and even imprisonment until the matter is resolved, and they cannot be pardoned by President Trump. That we know is clear. If they still don't comply, more officials can be held in contempt, and even anyone on the outside of government assisting them would be considered violating the law. It's the United States Marshal's Office, which comes under the management of the Department of Justice, but their purpose is to enforce court orders. They have never not enforced court orders in their entire history. So we have within the system a system of checks and balances, the appropriate checks to bring about the kind of balance that we desire in a democracy. One would hope that we don't have to go there, but with this administration, nothing will surprise anyone.
And we have one more question from Nicola in West Hartford. And she saw a headline that James Carville suggested Democrats should wait for the Republican Party to implode instead of resisting. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I have great respect for James Carville, and I think that it's and I understand where he's coming from in terms of when people are headed in a purely wrong direction that is totally counterintuitive to any one of our offices that we hold in any branch of government. It's the old give them enough rope to let them hang themselves. But I don't think we're in a time where we can't educate the public, especially in a time when somebody like Trump and like Elon Musk believe that by dominating the airwaves, by paying for that, by soaking social media with mistruths and lies, that they can in turn change people's minds and get them to believe that what they are doing is legal. So, as much respect as I have for James Carville, I think now is the time for people, every elected official, from a local member of a board of education all the way up to a United States senator, has got to be on their game and got to be informing the public about the actions of this administration, what they mean, and what the ramifications are if legislation is adopted or if executive orders are followed through on. And so I think sessions like these are vitally important. And Betty Marafino said something at our rally the other day at the Social Security Administration. She said, and I want everyone to go home. And it's not just about, we all know that our Connecticut delegation stands strongly with us, but you've got to have relatives or know people somewhere in other states. And even if you don't, call representatives from other states, call the Republicans that you think or have heard might be reasonable enough. We only need 3. Call them and implore them to do what's in the best interest of their country. I still believe in this country, Democrat and Republican, that you're going to find people that believe in the Constitution that we take an oath to serve under and will do the right thing. But it certainly helps when they know the rest of the country out there is watching and believes and is looking for them to do the right thing. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Look forward to doing our next one. And thank you for your very thoughtful questions as well. We greatly appreciate it. God bless, and God bless America.